start with Charlie. If many of you don't, if you don't know Charlie, I'm sure all of us do, but I'll go ahead and talk about his bio. He is the director for NOAA's new Gulf of Mexico Disaster Response Center that's located in Mobile, Alabama, and he serves as the DOC and the NOAA trustee representative to Regional Response Team 6 for oil and hazardous material incidents. For the 13 years previous to that assignment, he served as the NOAA Scientific Support Coordinator for the lower Mississippi River and the Western Gulf of Mexico. And he has more than 28, and that was like 3 years ago, so 32-ish years of environmental assessment and spill response experience. And he has responded to more than 200 oil spills and chemical spills. And during Deepwater Horizon incident, he served as the lead NOAA SSC to the Unified Area Command. So without further ado, Charlie, please. Thank you. You don't need a pointer.
No, thank you, Monica. Yeah, and kind of echo many of the people that, one of the speakers this morning. I really thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit. Couple things to get started. I had a little bit of a technical problem, so I couldn't pull my slides off my computer because my computer does no longer recognize me as a credentialed federal employee and won't let me access it today. But that's not a problem. So all you're going to miss is a few slides showing burning oil because I'm going to say everything I was going to say whether I had slides there or not. In fact, I think I do a better job speaking and we get tired of looking at PowerPoints anyway, so it'll all be good. I have been chained to this podium, or lectern, I think is the official term for it, since they can, so we can, be able to let people that are on the phone here, and I think they also are like videotaping us up here too. So got to keep that in mind. So I should add that even though, thanks for the introduction, Monica, I do work for NOAA, but I'm supposed to have a slide that says that all things that I say today do not necessarily represent the Department of Commerce or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and they are Charlie Henry's personal views. So now that we have the disclaimer out of the way, we can start talking a little bit about one of my favorite subjects. Oil spills are not one of my favorite subjects. I used to tell people I have sometimes the worst job in the country because I deal with things that aren't fun. No one's happy during an oil spill. But I will say that when you burn oil, at least it's kind of fun for a little while. These big fires like this going, and it can be kind of exciting. I've been chasing spills. I said my old boss, Dr. Ed Overton, will be following behind. I'll be setting the stage a little bit for Dr. Overton. Ed, as he says, hired me off the street in 1985. And so I've been chasing spills. And my first oil spill was doing the chemistry and damage assessment on the Arco Anchorage in 1985. Basically, Dr. O, after he hired me, had a whole big stack of papers and reports, and he threw them in front of me and said, "This is what I did, now go forward to do other things." And I had a great working relationship with Ed. It's always good to collaborate with Ed, even today, even the presentations. I had lunch sitting outside with some of the people from Morgan City in Houma. And that was really good because that's the new generation of people that I used to work with all the time when I was a science support coordinator. But it brought into one thing directly in line with what we're talking about during my little 15 minutes today, and talking about in situ burning. And I remember an incident that we had down behind East Timberleer Island in Timberleer Bay. And this was in 1992. This is a long time ago. Open 90 was in effect. We were in the new way that we were responding to oil spills. We had an incident going on. And it was one of those incidents. It was a well blowout in the middle of the night. The Osros had responded quickly. And by the time I got on scene and was working that incident and put me up in a helicopter for a quick overview at about 9:30, 10 o'clock that morning, the first morning of the incident, one of the things we saw was there was 2 beautiful boom sets that the Osros had done during the night. And each of those booms were nice U-set shaped booms, and they were down current from where the oil spill was coming from that well blowout. And each of them had about 1,000 barrels of oil in it. And it was just beautiful. I mean, great. Now, there was nothing recovering that oil. There was nothing responding to it. But we had that boom in place to protect some of the interior parts of the bay, and it was collecting oil. So the first part went real well. And this was long before, Captain Frank Paskowitz and Clean Gulf had a lot of their new resource equipment. There wasn't as much equipment at Gulf as there is today. And so the limiting factor on that was the oil was contained, but there was nothing to pick it up. And I remember sitting there and saying, boy, I wish we could burn that oil. because it would have been perfect to burn that oil. And the reason you need to think about it that way is because being the NOAA guy working in support of the response and taking a look at the science issues is, I knew if you fish much, I do a lot of fishing. If you do a lot of fishing around that part of Timber Bay, East Timber Bay, you fish based on what? Tides. And we knew in about an hour and 15 minutes, the tide was going to change. And sure enough, the tide changed. All that oil that was collected during the night comes out of the boom, is just spread and lost to the environment, now impacting shorelines and causing impact because we could not mitigate that oil that they had captured because we didn't have the tools there to rapidly respond. I will say though that even if we could have put a match to it, it wouldn't work because in situ burning oil in place is actually fairly simple in many ways, but it's also sophisticated in other ways in that you have to use the right kind of boom in the right type of conditions, or if we had just ignited that oil in that standard little, orange boom, it would have lasted about 2 minutes, the boom would have failed and it had gone its own way anyway, because it's not fire. These fires burn very hot and require a really specialized boom to be able to make it an operational issue. So let's back up. There was a lost opportunity where burning might have helped us in 1992. Burning oil associated with an oil spill is not a new concept or new idea. Mike Sams with the Coast Guard in his presentation this morning showed a slide about the Torrey Canyon in 1967. And that was a long time ago. I'm kind of old, not as old as Ed, my old boss, but I'm kind of old. But I don't even remember 1967. I was pretty young at the time. I do remember the Beatles were out, and I share an affiliation with the Beatles because John Lennon and I share the same birthday, so I was connected to the Beatles. So the Beatles were a big band, 1967, and they had the big oil spill that actually resulted in our national contingency plan because America wanted to be better organized on how to respond to an incident like that. What Mike said that the response was fairly disorganized. They tried everything. One of the things they did try was in situ burning of the oil, most of the oil on the vessel, but trying to burn it at the site, which is the same in situ burning, in place burning. And they did that with some sophisticated technology as well. They used Navy bombers to basically drop bombs and napalm on it, and it wasn't very effective. Didn't do a very good job. So the technology they used wasn't right. You have to control the oil in a certain way to make it effective. But the concept for burning was alive and well. And it had been used inland for burning and mitigating oil problems in the past. In fact, even at that time, right shortly after, I forget the date, it became state legislation, but in the state air quality permits, actually had a permit process for burning oil that was part of the state of Louisiana record. And because burning had been used with the oil industry more inland and not offshore. So burning oil was not new, but doing it is much more difficult offshore. So burning was an idea. Next big thing that kind of came along that kind of moved it forward was an incident in 1989. And that's one I do remember because Ed launched me to Alaska with a heavy Parker, and I worked the Exxon Valdez with Ed. And we had a lot of different roles, and one of those roles after the event especially was looking at new technologies to enhance those technologies so they could be better in place for future spills so we could use those tools effectively. Dispersants was one, in situ burning, bioremediation was another. We spent a lot of time researching and working both with the industry side and the federal side on improving those technologies. During Exxon Valdez, they did do a burn. They did one test burn. And there's a person's name I have to mention because if you want to talk about the concept of burning oil, the concept of many spill response issues, you have to know the name Al Allen. Al Allen was the father for this type thing. Now, Al Allen is recently retired. He's running a few medical things. He's got old, but he is one of those guys that was the icon for spill response planning. And two concepts that Al Allen created and sold and drive a lot of the work that goes into the planning. And you guys have heard these concepts and maybe didn't know they were Al Allen. And one is a concept called encounter rate, and the other is a concept called, what's other Allen's concept? Window of opportunity. That's it. Those are his two big pieces. So the key point is that encounter rate has to do with the big slick on the surface of the water. Well, what tools encounter that oil to mitigate, whether it's the skimming system and the width of that skimming system, or the width of that swath from a dispersant aircraft that's going 100 times faster than the skimmer. And that starts to factor into how do I encounter the oil so I can counter the oil to mitigate it, whether it's removing it or treating it. And that concept factors in also for in situ burning, because if you're going to burn oil with a sophisticated boom, what do I have to first do? I get the boom out on scene. I have to set that boom in a place to encounter enough oil, to put enough oil in that boom, and then ignite the oil to burn. So I'm suffering from a lot of the same physical restraints I get with mechanical recovery and the technologies used to enhance mechanical recovery. During the Exxon Valdez, we said there was one test burn. They put a boom out, fire boom, barium fire boom, all is good. They got oil in the boom. Al Allen ignited that oil, it burned pretty well. There wasn't much smoke because it was about dark by the time they ignited that oil, so no one saw anything much. And the next morning, he reported that it was highly effective, worked real well, but there was some controversy. People wanted to know, well, just how effective was it? They wanted to know, what about the environmental trade-offs? You know, did it really boil the water to impact the animals in the water? Was that smoke plume, what kind of impact was that smoke plume to the population and to people, you know? And those questions meant that it went from a test burn to a discussion. And before that discussion was over with, if you know anything about the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and then about day 3, this big storm came up, blew all that oil all over the place. Any opportunity, window of opportunity was now lost to even consider in situ burning from that point on. And so that was lost. But after the fact, those questions remained. You know, how efficient is burning? You know, what about the environmental issues? And so there was a lot of research done after '89, especially after Open 90 was passed, and then some processes through IPPAR and other issues to kind of as incentives. And also some of the industry groups, such as, at the time, Minerals Management Service, were really interested in, you know, extending this technology for in situ burning. So we did a lot of research. MMS did a lot of research, some of it in onset, some of it was done on Little Sand Island off of Mobile Bay, some of it was done at the LSU Fire School, and some of it was done in the Arctic. Some of it was done because you could not, you know, you cannot spill oil in this country and light it on fire to do studies in the open environment. EPA don't get permits for that. But they do allow Canadians to do it. So some of the money went to Canada, and Canada did some studies. And they looked at things. They looked at these questions. And it really came down, actually something else happened during that time. They had this thing that happened in Kuwait where Saddam Hussein retreated and put 650 oil wells on fire. They gave us another opportunity to research kind of in a real world environment, and we worked on that. Well, one of the things we learned through all these studies is that the oil doesn't burn or boil underneath the slick of the water. In fact, after about a couple inches, the water temperature is exactly the same, because water is such a big heat sink and an insulator at the same time. And water is continually moving on that boom. So what's below the surface of the water is not a problem. We also learned that we can improve the technologies of these booms and igniting systems to be more effective to make it happen. We also learned that the smoke plume, which was a big concern and a big threat, that working with CDC and other groups to really look at this, study this burn, you know, I guess you should back off. Well, what happens when you burn the oil, when we ignite it? It's a chemical reaction. You know, my background is, you know, in chemistry. Ed taught me what I know. So if you think I get wrong, blame it on Ed. But oil chemistry and burning oil is a chemical reaction. It's an oxidation reaction. It's a very rapid oxidation reaction. Not much different than a slow oxidation reaction when we just are digesting all these carbohydrates from the rice that we just ate. So we're going to convert that to carbon dioxide and water. Those are the two primary products of burning oil, carbon dioxide and water. It's the same as it was going to intended to happen if it burns in your car. It's going to produce carbon dioxide and water. It's not a perfect burn. It's not 100% efficient. So you produce some byproducts, some incomplete combustion products. And those are associated with the smoke and soot that you see. And there's a different chemistry associated with that that's been researched in very detail for a long period of time. We understand that chemistry real well. You also have some residues that, because the oil burning on the water is not 100% effective, when the oil burns down to a certain thickness, it loses heat to the water column, and actually the fire goes out, and there's some highly reduced tarry residues that are often left behind, and some of those sink, and Ed's going to talk a bit more about those residues and some of the chemistry of that. But we know there's like, it's really heavy tarry stuff. It's like tar you use for pitch on your roof. CDC basically said that the biggest problem with the smoke plume is the particulate, especially those small particulates, PM10 or PM2.5 by the day standard, that can be breathed in and breathe deeply in your lungs and potentially cause an impact. And there's a lot of regulatory levels that are set for PM10 for ambient air quality. There's a lot of knowledge based on the PM10 for ambient air quality, and that's the standards we use on developing the tool for in situ burning on potential threats to the public. And that was that, we were never going to create a situation that we burned that was even going to exceed the ambient air standard for an hour, even though it was based on a 24-hour period, even be safer than ever. And in reality, we're never going to burn when there was a population center downwind from the smoke plume. So even though we were going to monitor it, they weren't going to be there to be exposed anyway. So we studied that really heavy. I think we overcame that. Big black plume, but there's worse. If you look actually at comparison to plumes that people deal with all the time, forest fires actually create more smoke and more hazardous smoke than burning oil does. And it has to do with the nature of the material that's been burning initially, some of the different byproducts it can produce, and the total volume that it can produce. So we have a comparison with that was heavily studied. Bottom line is we worked through all those issues. And we were ready. In fact, all industry was ready. They had fire boom positioned. Coast Guard even got into the contingency plan in case industry didn't have a way to ignite it real quick. They even purchased one of these Department of Forestry igniters that hits on a helicopter and drops those jelly little balls that kind of used for prescribed burns. We were set. And that was starting in about 1995. We were set. In fact, we had rules in place about the residue. Places that, with the area contingency plan, that would not be allowed to burn oil in case there was residue that sank, that would be in areas of concern, like NOAA's national marine sanctuaries and other different type of targets. So we had a plan. Everyone wanted to burn oil because we thought there was value because of the ability to not remove it from the environment, but remove oil from the surface of the water pretty quickly in situations where we couldn't do anything else otherwise. When was the next time we burned oil? 2010. I think it was like 28th of April, 2010. So through all of Open 90, through 20-something years of being prepared to burn oil at sea, the first opportunity we had that we could try to do it was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And that started on 8 days after the initial explosion. Al Allen was one of the guys out there to help make it happen. And the end result, they did, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was well over 1,000. It was in the many hundreds of burns. Actually, it's between 5 and 8% of the total amount of oil that was released into the environment is believed to have been captured and burned at sea. Okay? That's a significant amount of a spill that size. That's close to 500,000 gallons. I'm sorry, 500,000 barrels of oil that were captured. Huh?
More than the Valdez spill.
Exactly, more than the Exxon Valdez spill. Thank you there, Robert. So that was the first opportunity, but it took 8 days to get set to do that. That's why we hadn't burned oil at sea before, because most incidents, you lose that window of opportunity to be able to capture the oil with those sophisticated boom systems to do the job. How much time? I got 2 minutes. Okay, so there's the deal. It's a great tool. The window of opportunity is dependent on the oil itself. Emulsions can make it that the oil won't ignite and burn. So once it gets emulsified, it's not going to burn. And you have to be able to capture that oil, put it thick enough in the back of a boom to do that. And that usually means you've got a continuous source before that window of opportunity is going to be there for you to do it. So it's a tool that we think has a lot of real value under the right conditions. Deepwater Horizon oil spill was the only time since Open 90 that it's been used, although there was a lot of research went into getting ready for that, and so they were in position to do that. There's still continuing research doing to make it look at more efficiency instead of being at 95, 98% efficiencies in the burns, even improve that even better, to reduce the amount of smoke. There's different catalysts that can be used to reduce the amount of smoke, which reduces that piece of the equation. to make the trade-off when you're looking at the pros and cons from the environmental perspective even more, more attractive. We still have the problem with residues, and those can be a problem. And to kind of set the stage for Dr. O to pass on, once we had secured the well, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and we were working still on a lot of offshore and mostly nearshore and onshore spill recovery issues, cleanup issues. We thought things were starting to get back better because one of the industries that had been operating a fishery offshore went back into producing, and I think that was in late October, early November, sometime around then. And it was a fishery I'd never even heard about. I'm born and raised South Louisiana, but I'd never heard of this royal red fishery. It's a deep water shrimp fishery that they run these long trolls, like 20 and 30 mile long trolls offshore way down on the end of the continental shelf. And a couple of the first trolls that came back, and they had tarry residue in their nets. And I overlaid their track line with all the burns that we did. GIS is great, you can overlay things pretty quickly. And it was right on the edge, right on the shelf, right on the edge of the burns, and they had picked up some chunks of oil, okay? And that was kind of a concern. Now, maybe it wasn't very toxic because it was big tarry chunks of oil, but who would market shrimp that now has been contacted with oil at the bottom? So it definitely was an impact to the fishery beyond that point. And at that point, we took those samples and gave them to Dr. Overton, and he did a little more research on top of the other research he's done in 25 years of thinking about burning oil and other work. And now mine says in, so I'm passing the rest of the story to Dr. Overton.